So, hey, I'm going to show you something that might get me chucked out of Web Developer Club. But I think that it's a tool that's really easy, that anybody can use to find out why a website is slow or why it's fast, for that matter. The key is that about 10 years ago, Google realized that the experience on the web for a lot of people was pretty poor. Web pages were too slow. So they decided to do something about it. After all, Google is dependent entirely on the web for their business. They don't operate these closed, walled gardens like Facebook do, where essentially, yes, you access it via the web, but you can access it in many other ways too. So Google needs you to have a good time on the web so that you see Google's adverts that people pay for, that are placed on websites all around. Google being, the world's biggest advertising network. But these kind of tools are generally not known about outside the web studios and web development agencies that exist. But they're there and they're public. And the tool I'm going to show you now is called PageSpeed Insights. I think it'll be quite useful for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up a few websites through it. I'll cut it a little bit because some parts are a bit slow. And I'll show you how the analysis works and how you can interpret that. And hopefully that will let you understand whether your website is performing well and what you need to do to improve that. And trust me, 9 times out of 10, you can improve most websites quite dramatically. Some websites, you're limited. You only have so many options because you're entirely dependent on advertising revenue. But if you're not dependent on advertising revenue, it may be worth having a really good look at how that impacts a good percentage of your visitors. And if you do it right, if you use the tool right, you actually can understand just how many of your visitors are affected. So let's take a look. Literally, all you have to do is put in the URL of a website. I'm going to just find the Liverpool Echo's website just to be sure that I've got the right one. There we go. So I'm going to copy that, paste it in here, analyze. I hope this doesn't get me in trouble. Because, you can take the output of this and wave it at a web developer and say, hey, not good enough. Especially if you've got no adverts on your website. It should be fast if you have no adverts. So here we go. Liverpool Echo. On mobile, on this run through, it scored 11. We go through to desktop, we can see that it scored 25. 11 is pretty bad. Anything under 50, really you need to do something about it. This is just a generic score. It doesn't mean a great deal. You can hover over things and it'll give you a scoring guide, which you can use to understand it. It's calculators, everything like that. But the key is, 0 is the worst possible score, 100 is the perfect score. Pretty hard to get 100, especially if you're loading things like web fonts, using any scripts on your website for behavior tracking, so on. It does add up. Here we have the first contentful paint. That's not actually that useful measure. I wouldn't worry too much about that one. What's actually more important there is the largest contentful paint. And that's the largest element on a web page that is generally going to be the one that's most relevant to people visiting that website. And here you can see that it's typically about 5.1 seconds. It's only good under 2.5 seconds for 6% of visitors. 51% have 2.5 second to 4 second contentful paint. And 43% of visitors are over 4 seconds. That's pretty poor. So in effect, you can see there, 94% of visitors have a very slow, largest contentful paint. Then you have the measure of the first input delay. That's when, after the page is effectively painted, how long does it take before it becomes responsive? You see that the page is loaded, and you can see here that 73% of loads, once that page is done, the next input delay is pretty good. It's under 100 milliseconds. The average is 112 milliseconds there. 16% have not great experience. 11% have what is seen as a jarring experience. It's over 300 milliseconds. People just notice that because they want to get scrolling. They want to see the content. The next one is the cumulative layout shift. Here again, you can see that for this site, you've got 32% are good, 24% could do with some improvement, 44% have a bad problem. But what is a cumulative layout shift? Well, that's when things move on the page. Basically, you go, you're reading, and suddenly, boom, what you're reading just disappears out of existence. It's not a nice experience for anybody. And it's even worse if you go to press something and it moves out of the way and you don't know if you pressed it or you just hit an advert or something like that. And it can be quite jarring. There's a lot of other measures that come through with the PageSpeed Insights here. You've got time to interactive there. I mean, 34 seconds, that's pretty miserable, to be honest. I wouldn't say that this is a well-performing website. And neither do Google PageSpeed Insights. I did, in fact, do a full review of the Echo quite recently, and you can see that on the channel. In fact, the link is just, let's put it here. So you get all this information, and you can just send this to any web developer, and they shouldn't be able to actually create some kind of action plan to improve it. But let's have a very quick look at why it's so slow. Well, there's some savings here, 3.5 seconds with unused JavaScript. But it's not great in general. And here's the biggest problem. Minimize main thread work, 27 seconds. So script evaluation is 13.5 seconds of the page load's time. It's a lot. And there's other things going on. Other stuff, it doesn't quite clarify that, but you've got the style and the layout. That takes a bit of time, but that's often down to all those scripts and so on. Garbage collection, that's just tidying up memory after running script. That's just over a second, just tidying up the memory on your computer. And rendering, 2.5 seconds, style and layout, 2.5 seconds. It adds up. It's a lot of work going on. If you're on a mobile phone, that can not only use up a lot of battery for one of your site visitors, but it just gives a bad experience. So you've got a double whammy there. You're not really treating your customers with a lot of respect when your website acts like that. So your content needs to be really good if it's going to be free, but slow to render like that. Let's compare this to a website we built recently. So I'm going to just open a new tab and let's do the critic. Now, this is one of ours. Relatively simple site, no display adverts on it at all. This is something you're starting to see more and more actually with publishers. Just keep the advertising down to a minimum because that way you can give people the absolute best quality experience. The website loads quickly, the website is simple, and there's no jarring movements or changes. Once this is finished analysing, we'll get some figures out of it. It's not going to be perfect because ultimately it's actually surprisingly hard to get that super high score unless your web page is really, really super simple. So there we go. On mobile, we've got a score of 72. On desktop, a score of 93. So if you're on a desktop browser like we are here, it's really good. It's how it should be, really. So let's go back to the mobile one then. Why does mobile score differently to desktop? Well, mobile browsers have less capacity. They're also differently sized, different things go on, and there's different optimizations you may want to apply to mobile that you wouldn't apply to desktop, for example, image sizes and so on. So here we've got, you can see largest contentful paint for 70% of people. Perfect. 18%, not quite perfect. 11%, bit poor. That's taking into account the different performance of, for example, a relatively high-end, albeit 3-year-old phone like mine here, or a low-end phone like this Motorola G5 that I have here as a spare. You really have to think about that. You have to think about the bandwidth that people have available to them. Are they up a mountain somewhere, or are they at the end of a fast fibre connection like we have in the office? But you can see there just how quickly the page loads, and you can see a lot more information. If we compare it to what we saw with the Liverpool Echo, you can see the render blocking resources is 1.7 seconds. So, it even tries to give some advice because the site is based on the WordPress system. It says use a plugin. In fact, we're pretty optimized on that. But yes, there are some things you can do. We could improve the performance of the CSS, for example. Is it worth it? Yes, sometimes it is. But like I say, it's scoring pretty well, and it's a fairly low budget site. It's a small publication, relatively new, relatively fresh startup. We could make it better. We could make it a lot worse very easily. And that's one of the key things. It's so easy to make a site go slowly. So hard to make it go fast. And there you go. That's the really simple way of analysing the performance of a web page. You can do this also for internal pages, and you get different figures because internal pages often are simpler than home pages. Home pages tend to have many images, lots of things going on, maybe sliders or carousels or interactive content. But once you're in a post, which is mostly words and pictures and a few navigation options, it gets a lot simpler. In fact, you find that marketing pages and checkout pages are often kept super duper simple because it's really important that the experience on a marketing page or on a checkout is maximal because you need people to continue to finish their purchase. Free content that's given away on the internet, obviously there's a bit less motivation in some ways because the direct connection between people viewing and people paying you money may not be quite there. In fact, if that receipt of money is based entirely off advertising, then you do get this kind of situation, like you saw on the Liverpool Echo. They only make money from advertising, really. So what other options do they have? So I hope that's been helpful. I'm going to do more videos like this. I'm trying to experiment a little bit with the tone, structure, and pacing of my videos. And I look forward to doing many more in the months to come. Please subscribe and see you soon.